Students, बात कर रहे हैं हम लोग VLANs की या फिर virtual LANs की, and I explained to you the concept of VLANs and how it helps in the case of users which are geographically distant from each other. How can they still be part of one single virtual LAN? Students, we'll talk about the membership of a VLAN. What specific characteristics that we base our membership of the VLANs on? How can we group different users together in one particular VLAN and group another set of users together in the case of the other VLAN? Since there can be multiple criteria or a combination of these criteria. For example, we can have interface numbers. So different users which have got the different interface numbers can be part of one single VLAN. We can have port numbers. Different users which have the same port numbers, they can be part of one VLAN. Students, a particular set of link layer addresses or MAC addresses or physical addresses, we can combine them together, and we can have IP addresses. So we can say that a particular IP address from a particular subnet, and we'll talk about that in our later courses. They can be combined together in one single VLAN. And similarly, we can have VLANs based on IP multicast addresses or a combination of any of these. It is completely reliant on, and it completely depends upon your system administrator and your company's IT policy as to how you want to create those VLANs, and that is what's going to define how you're going to create or define the membership of that particular virtual LAN. After the configuration of VLAN, how we group the stations together in a particular VLAN, then there are three techniques or three ways that we use to configure the stations in a VLAN. The first is called manual, the second is called semi-automatic, and the third one is automatic. So it's in the first case of manual. Although you are still using manual, is not about you actually go and you start working by reconnecting the physical wiring once again, although you're working on a virtual LAN. In the case of a manual configuration of a virtual LAN, you've got a software, and you actually go and you define membership criteria, and you manually choose the different users that you want to group together in the form of a particular VLAN. So you do all the grouping and the membership criteria, you do all of that by using the VLAN software, but you do it manually. Since in the case of automatic, you do it completely automatically, so that you can use the VLAN software, and there are softwares available that allow you to define a rule, for example, that says that if the port number on a particular machine changes, then please change that machine from VLAN 1 to VLAN 2. So as soon as the port number on a particular of a particular user changes, that user automatically gets moved from VLAN 1 to VLAN 2. So you can do it completely automatically without any human intervention. And then students, the semi-automatic is somewhere in between these two. You can define rules in which you require human intervention to group and to redictate or redefine the membership of a particular VLAN, and you can define some rules which allow you to do this reallocation automatically. So that's your semi-automatic, somewhere between manual and automatic. Students, communication between switches in this particular case, in a multi-switch backbone, each switch must know which station belongs to which particular VLAN, and then the membership of stations that are connected to all the other switches that make up a VLAN. Students, the slide represents this concept. You've got a backbone switch, in this particular case on the top, that's connecting two different switches. In this case, switch A and switch B, and then you've got VLANs 1, 2, and 3. And students, the point that I'm trying to emphasize is that switch A in this particular case, the first switch, it must know the membership status of the stations that are connected to switch B. And the reason for that is because it is sharing a virtual LANs with this other switch. And switch B, vice versa, it must know the same about switch A. Students, we have got three methods that we normally use for this particular purpose, for the switches that are sharing the VLANs, to actually know the status of the membership status of the stations that are connected to the other switch. And it is called table maintenance, in which each of the switches, it uses a particular technique called table maintenance to maintain the table, and they also ping the other switches, and they, based on that, they update their tables. So when a station needs a broadcast frame, and it sends it to its group members, the switch creates an entry in the table, and it records the station membership as well. Students, the second one is called the frame tagging. As you can see here, in the case of frame tagging, when a frame is traveling between switches, an extra header gets added to the MAC frame to define the destination VLAN, and the frame tag is used by the receiving switch to determine the VLANs to the receiving broadcast message. And students, the last one is your time division multiplexing, and as you already know, the connection between the switches, it's divided into time shared channels in the case of TDM, and if the total VLANs in a backbone is 5, for example, each trunk is divided into 5 channels, and the traffic that is destined for VLAN 1 travels in channel 1, the traffic for VLAN 2 travels in channel 2, and so on, and the receiving switch will determine the destination VLAN by checking the particular channel from which the frame has arrived on that particular time division multiplexed switch. So students, the advantages of the VLANs, as you must have guessed by now, the first one is the reduction of the cost and time. So by creating VLANs, you reduce the cost and you reduce the time by removing the need to physically rewiring and physically removing connections and then reconnecting them. You can create virtual workgroups. I gave you an example of 2 offices which are present distant apart, and you can still create a workgroup, a finance workgroup between these 2 offices, although they can be hundreds and thousands of miles apart. And the last one is security. Students, the users in one particular VLAN will have access to the users or the other stations which are part of that particular VLAN only. They will have no access to other data of the other VLANs, and the same goes for the users of the other VLANs as well. The data is secure in that particular VLAN, and so we ensure the security by segregating the users and the workgroups into different VLANs as well.